Hey, what's up? My name's Samuel Leeds and I'm a property investor, and in this video I want to talk, no, I don't want to talk. I'm going to talk because I think it's going to be helpful to some of you about my failures as a property investor. So in this video I'm going to be giving my top 10, there's a lot of failures there, top 10 failures over the last 11 years of me actively investing in property. And the reason I'm going to share these is because I want to help you guys, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes. And some of these things might make me look silly or incompetent or whatever. So you can judge me if you like, but I think in order to succeed, sometimes you have to fail. And these mistakes that I've made have cost me a lot of money, cost me a lot of heartache, a lot of pain. And I'm going to go through each one and hope you will benefit from it. And I hope they will be able to save you the pain that I had to go through. So the first thing is, you may know my story, that a lot of the properties that I accumulated in the early days, I put them in other people's names. So I put one in my stepdad's name and one in my brother's and then a few, and I naively thought that when I was at the age or had the ability to get the mortgage, I could just transfer them over to me and it'll be easy peasy. That was not the case. Now, I'm glad that I did at least get them and put them in other people's names, but it was actually really hard to move them over into my name, and it cost a lot of money. I had to pay stamp duty again. It was a hassle. It was like a whole new purchase, and that was something that I really didn't expect. So I put it off. I mean, now every person that put a property in their name on my behalf, I have moved them over. It was also worrying because I didn't have contracts in place. So at times, even though they were my family members, I was a bit uneasy because I had so much equity in some of the properties. And I was thinking, technically they could just say, the house is in my name, we've got no contract. Like, I was very, very, very naive. I was a kid at the time, 17, 18, 19 when I was doing this. But looking back, I would have at least had a contract, and I would have got a legal advice to structure it in a better way. Maybe it was in trust for me and it would be just easy. So that was a big mistake, number one. It cost me a lot of time and also quite a bit of stress. Number two, so when I started out in property and I had these houses and I had tenants, I used to become friends with my tenants, and I thought, what a great thing. How nice that I actually get on with my tenants. I'd take them out for dinners. I'd be on matey terms with my tenants. And I noticed over the years that every time I did that, pretty much every single time, it always turned bad. And what would happen is they'd end up like not paying their rent, or they'd pay their rent late. And then it would be a bit awkward because we went out to the chip shop and had a dinner, you know, so it was awkward, and they'd sort of say, oh, you know, I'm sure you'll understand. I've got some issues. I've got some extra bills I didn't expect. You know, I hope you understand. I'll pay double next month. And then it's like, actually, no, that's not cool. But because you've become friends and friendly, it gets really awkward. So what I've learned from that is just don't become friends with your tenants. Remain professional. Of course, be kind. Even now, I'll get Christmas gifts or cards or whatever, but in a professional way, not in a matey way with tenants, because it's never worked well for me. And number three, and this is kind of a similar thing, still on the topic of managing tenants, and I don't know why I kept doing this, and it kept failing for me, and I kept doing it again, and that is, sometimes what tenants would say to me is they'd say, hey, you know, how about we won't have a management company? Give me a reduced rent. We don't need the middle management company. I'll just pay you direct and I'll be a really good tenant. And if there's any issues, little niggly things around the house that need fixing, I'll fix it myself. It will save your management, save your maintenance, but I want a little bit of a cheaper rent. Now, the human in me was like, well, that makes sense. And the businessman in me was like, well, that makes sense. I'm not going to be getting phone calls. I don't have to pay a management company, cut out the middleman, makes sense. Every time I've done it, it's not worked. And what happened, I actually got caught out on this by the TV. They did a show on it. So what they did, and of course the TV always like drama, but what they did was they don't like landlords or property investors usually. So they asked me if I could go on a show a BBC show, and I was like, yeah, of course, you know, I've got nothing to hide, I've got great tenants, it's all good. They said, you know, what's your tenant's relationship with you like? I was like, brilliant, of course. So then they viewed loads of my houses, interviewed loads of my tenants, and of course they found the one that was the most drama, the problem tenant, the problem issue. And here's what had happened. So I had a tenant, nice lady, she was called Marie. I can say that because it was on the BBC show, so it's public. She was called Marie. She moved into one of my houses on the basis that she'd pay reduced rent, no management, that story, that setup. But the problem was, when there was a problem that needed fixing, she didn't have the money to fix it. But she didn't want to tell me that there was a problem because then she thought I'd put her rent up. So what would happen is there'd be a little problem in the house and she'd just leave it. And you probably know if there's a problem in the house and you leave it, what happens is it gets worse. So this leak in the roof had just dripped and dripped and dripped. She didn't want to tell me. There was no management company because I wanted to save my pennies. And then this leak turned into a major problem and the roof basically caved in. And then I went to the property and it's like, oh, what happened? So the little £40 a month that I'd saved each month, now I've got to spend £6,000 getting this roof repaired. And that was the moment, I think that was like 2016, when I thought, okay, from now on, I'm going to have management companies and every 6 months, I'm going to have a feedback form, check in with the tenants, make sure there's no problems with the houses, do an inspection of some kind, and I learned the hard way. So that's mistake number 3. Mistake number 4. This is a bad one, and that is losing AST contracts with tenants. I move house a lot, so I move house. My office used to be based at my house, especially with the property side of the business, with the management side of the business. And sometimes when I've moved house, I've lost paperwork because how often do you need to look at an AST contract? If you've got tenants that have lived there like 5 years, you don't particularly look at it every week. And then what happens is the tenant stops paying rent or they become a bad tenant and you want to kick them out. And you're like, man, where's their, and you're looking through and you can't find their AST contracts, you've lost it. Guess what that means? Bad news. That means that you are gonna really struggle to kick them out because you've got no contract with them. So this has happened to me probably about 10 times, probably a little more. I'm ashamed to say it, but hey, I've got a lot of tenants and I've been in the business for over a decade and it's just something that has happened and it's every time I've gone, it's never going to happen again. And then it's happened again. Also, this is when it happens, when you change letting agency, when your agency, if you fire a letting agency and then they go bust or whatever, and then the tenant stays in there. And then you bring in a new one and they're like, where's the contract? And you speak to the letting agent and they're like, they're either gone bust or they ignore you or they've fallen out with you or you never had a letting agent and you lose the AST contract. Hold AST contracts with your life lest you later need to rely on it to kick out a tenant. Okay, number 5. This is the worst. This mistake didn't cost me any money, but it brought me so much stress and it could have cost me everything. And that is this: filing your accounts late. Now listen, if you file your accounts late, what's the problem? Maybe the accountant, files them a bit late and then you have to pay a fine or whatever. No problem. No, wrong. Big problem. Massive problem. Because if you've got a company that holds properties and the company files its account, even if it's just something like a completion statement or whatever, the HMRC, Companies House, can give the company a strike. And if you still don't realise because you don't open letters and you change accountants and you have sloppy accountants, okay, and then you don't file it, what they can do is they can literally close the company down. You lose everything. I'm serious. This is the weirdest thing. I've had it where I've filed a company accounts late, okay, and then I've had a message off HMRC saying your company's got a strike, and if you don't do it, we could literally close the company, cease it to exist, you lose everything. And I'm like, surely not. Surely just by filing your accounts late, they can't take everything from you. They can. Never, ever let that happen to you. Make sure you're on top of your accountant. Make sure he's aware of all of your companies. Because what I do, sometimes I'll set up a new company Okay, I'll be like, oh, I need to set up a new company because I want it to ring fence and I'll get these few properties. And then I've not told my accountant. I know you're probably thinking now I'm a terrible person and I'm an awful, incompetent businessman. Listen, I'm just being honest with you and I'm telling you some of the mistakes that I've made over the last over a decade. And that one could have cost me almost everything. Don't let it happen to you. Mistake number 6, and this is with builders, dealing with builders. When you're dealing with builders, make sure that you stick to budget, stick to time scale, get an itemized breakdown of everything. I think the biggest mistake that I've probably made is when I've had a project that needs doing and I've instructed a building company to come on and do all the works. And then I've looked at the breakdown of the bill and I thought, like, you know, £3,000 for the plumbing. I'm sure that's a bit expensive. And I've kind of stuck my nose in a bit too much. And then I've ended up saying to them, cancel that bit. You know, oh, you want to change the fuse box and change the electrics, it's going to cost £5,000. I reckon I could find someone to do it cheaper. Cancel that bit. And then I'll start bringing my own freelancers in. And it's just messy because what happens is tradespeople, workmen, get in each other's way. And when you're arranging for the plumber and you're arranging for the electrician and you're arranging for the plasterer and you're arranging for the painter, that it is a logistical nightmare. What you want is you want one point of contact that has their own team and they manage their own team, because otherwise what happens is tradespeople start blaming other tradespeople. Oh, they left this mess and that, I can't start on that until that's done. And they blame each other. Nightmare, nightmare, nightmare. Pay a little bit more, have it all systemized and just get it done properly. It'll be faster and ultimately it'll be cheaper. The job will be done better. Mistake number 7. This is a really interesting one because this one didn't come until a little bit later in my property journey and it kind of stuffed me a little bit. That is this. When you're selling your properties, and at some point you're gonna sell your properties. Not all of them, but you're buying properties, you're building your portfolio, and then there's gonna be a couple of properties, a few that you might wanna sell off to buy bigger deals, or some might not be performing as well, whatever. You're gonna end up having to sell properties. Now, when I sell properties, I usually use an auction because it's just fast and it's easy and it's seamless. But this is the problem I've had. So I'm looking at what properties to sell, and I don't wanna sell a property when it's got a good tenant in. Because if it's got a good tenant in and they're paying the rent and everything's swimmingly, then I don't like selling it too much. So I think I'll just keep that property actually. Even though it makes sense to sell it financially because the money I'll put in, I like the tenant, they're paying their rent well, I'll keep it. And then I don't sell it. And then what happens is I choose not to sell it and then the tenant moves out and then it's empty. And then it's like, the letting agent says, to get a new tenant, you're gonna need to spend a few £1,000s. You know, usually that's the case, to just fix a few things up, which the old tenant just kind of lived with and it was their norm, but now you need to change it. And then you spend a few thousand and then you get a new tenant and there's a problem with that new tenant. The new tenant doesn't pay their rent and then you think, forget it, and you wanna sell it. But then when you sell it, the buyer, who's an investor probably, because your properties are usually like investment type properties, the buyer will say, how long's the tenant been in there? And you'll say 3 months. Oh, and they paid their rent like last month. Like what happens is the property drops in price because it's not got a great tenant in. And then I'm thinking, I wish I'd just sold it with the good tenant in 3 months ago. Because if you've got a good tenant and it's all going swimmingly, it makes it much easier to sell the property. And you can say, hey, that tenant's been in there 6 years. They've always paid their rent on time. They're a good tenant. And then what happens is it's easier to sell and the price is higher. So don't not sell a property just because there's a good tenant in there. Sometimes that's the best time to sell a property, when it's all going swimmingly. If you've got a property that's not performing too well, or you've got a bad tenant, don't sell it then. Move the tenant out, put a good tenant in, and then sell it with a good tenant, assuming you're selling to investors, which usually I am. Mistake number 8, not having cash ready. So if you've got property and you can refinance it and pay really cheap, like 3%, and you think, that's great. What I've done in the past is I've had money there, I've had houses paid off, and I thought, okay, when I need the money, I can refinance. And then I'm looking at big deals, I'm looking at development, and I'm thinking, when the deal comes along, I'll just refinance. But then sometimes what happens is when you don't plan properly, you see something good and you suddenly need the money fast. And you're like, and you want the money fast. And for me, or you're doing a development project or something, and you're in a situation where you've got money, but you can't get it fast. And that is a horrible situation to be in. And I've ended up like taking out bridging loans, joint venturing with people on stuff, and I've resented it, and I've given really good returns when I've got the money myself, and I could get the money, but because of the timing issue, it's really annoying. So sometimes I could have got the money myself if I'd have planned a bit better. So I think the lesson here, a couple things, is number one is just forecast better. So if you've got a project going on, like the castle, for instance, I've had situations where I've suddenly needed like 100 grand to spend on the castle, and I've been like, oh man, and I've not been aware of it, and then it gets stressful. I've got the money, it's just tied up. So forecast well for cash flow, because you can be really rich, but if you haven't forecasted well for cash flow, you can still have money worries and be stressed out for short periods of time. And then the second thing is, if you've got access to money, it's sometimes better to pull the money out and then find the deals and the investment opportunities ready to go as a cash buyer, rather than looking for deals and then finding a really good opportunity where you need to move fast and then not having the money fast enough and having to give away percentages of the deal, high returns. So that's something that's been quite recent as well. This is an issue that I have had, you know, to be honest, it's come up periodically over the last kind of decade. And I mean, I've tried my best, I'm trying my best. I've now got finance managers, I've got a full-time accountant, I've got a really good finance team, but I still feel this area is something that I could get better at. Mistake number 9 is doing joint ventures with the wrong people. And I've had this, you know, back in the day. I feel like I'm probably better now than I was, but back in the day, for me, a joint venture was a case of, what am I bringing to the table? What are they bringing to the table? And is this win-win? And whilst that's true, I feel like when you're doing a joint venture with someone, there's also got to be a level of, you've got to be able to trust the person, and they've got to have good character, because even if you're doing a joint venture with someone and it's a great deal, if they're not a good person, if they're not the kind of person that you'd want to actually do business with, don't do it. Even if the deal's good. Make sure that when you're doing a deal with someone, if you're putting money in, if they're putting money in, any kind of agreement, because honestly, even if you have contracts and everything, you just don't want to be dealing with difficult people. You don't want to be dealing with stress heads. You want to be dealing with reasonable people. You want to be dealing with people that are nice people. You know, I'm a nice person. I'm a reasonable person. If a business deal doesn't work out, I don't sit there licking my wounds. I just say, oh, I didn't quite go to plan, no problem. Everyone in a joint venture, everyone's in the same situation, but sometimes when you deal with the wrong people, even if the deal makes more money than you thought, and then the other person's getting really greedy over the extra money, it's like, calm, and they're desperately, just take it from me. If you're doing a joint venture with someone, make sure that the person's got good character, make sure that the person is someone that you can really trust and that you get on with. And number 10, this is one that's really annoying, and it irritates me even thinking back, and I don't think I'm gonna ever let this happen to me again, and that's this: paying for training too late. So what I mean by that is, I have been in situations where there's been a course on something, and I'm like, or a training program. I don't want to pay the money because I'm being tight. I don't want to spend that 10 grand or whatever it might be. So I think I'll do it myself, and I'll learn myself a little bit. And then when I'm making a bit more money, or when I get a bit of money from it, then I'll put it into the training. And whilst that sounds reasonable, it's actually ridiculous, because here's what happens every time is, I think, I don't want to do the training, I can't quite afford it, or I'll try myself first. What happens is I end up doing it myself, and I succeed, and then I get the money, and I'm making good money, or I end up being a bit more successful or whatever, and then I'm like, oh, I need to go back on that. I need to go to that training course. I go on the training course, and then I just sit through the whole program thinking, I wish I'd known that then. Because like, it would have saved me so much heartache, so much money, so much, and some of the deals that I turned down, I'm like, oh, I could have made that work. Some of the deals that I took on, I'm like, oh, I lost more than 10 grand taking that stupid deal on. So I wish, looking back, and a failure of mine is doing the training, but doing it too late, putting it off when I can afford it more easily. That's a genuine, and again, some of the critics, oh, you're only saying that because you want people to go on your training programs. Jeez, I'm just speaking from my experience. A lot of my training's free anyway. Like, I run a free crash course, I run free YouTube videos, you know, but I do believe in training, and I think that I've always ended up paying more for my mistakes than I would have done if I'd have just got the right training. Because someone said, if you think training is expensive, then you should try ignorance. And that's so true. Ignorance is no excuse. It's costly. And you can either pay for your own mistakes or you can pay to learn from somebody else who's had the same mistake. So that's my top 10 failures and mistakes in property over the last decade or so. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm happy to be vulnerable. I'm happy to maybe even look a little bit silly in order for you to save on that pain. Also, if you want to see success stories of people absolutely killing it in property, I'd recommend you do that right here. And of course, don't forget to subscribe down here to the channel. Smash the like button, subscribe here, turn the notification bell on.